Well, this is John Black, Super Chemist, here to show you how I reprogram my brain. I mean, this, even if you're not depressed, even if you're a healthy individual, you know, reprogramming your brain is always a good thing, okay? Now, your brain, all it is a computer, all right? It's just a bioorganic computer. That's it. It's nothing special, all right? How do you input stuff? How do you input stuff on a computer? You type it in. You press enter. You know what I mean? You download it in there. How do you download info into your brain? Well, thoughts and words. External stimuli. I mean, it all will reprogram. That's how you input information into your brain. Now, me personally, I had most of my life, especially at the beginning, my input was I want to die. I hate life. Why are people like they are? Why is, this person like that? Why is that person like that? Why? Okay. A lot of, boy, I wish I was dead. You input I wish I was dead all day long and chant it in your brain. It's going to form synapses that are going to make you want that. People want what is familiar. You know what I mean? You might see a little kid and they're being molested by their parent or something, and then they grow up and they still let it happen, even though they're 18, 20, 30 years old. They're still letting that same parent molest them, or you know what I mean, sexually abuse them. You might say, well, why? You're an adult, you don't have to do that, blah blah blah. But they've already had 18 years of programming in their brain. You know what I mean? And the brain likes things that is familiar, even if it's terrible, even if you're being beat. You know what I mean? You grow up, you might, miss that beatings, believe it or not, because that's how you programmed it into your brain. Your brain either has to accept it or it has to be miserable. Either way, you're miserable. But so, anyways, here's say your synapses, your pathway to your bad thoughts, right? Now, a lot of people will tell you, and if you go see a psychologist, the first thing they'll tell you is on reprogramming is that you should do a lot of positive reinforcement. I personally think that's stupid. I don't think it's stupid. I just think that if that's the first thing you start with, you'll fail. Okay, you can't, because this pathway is deeply ingrained if you're an adult by now. Okay, if you're a teenager or older, this is deeply ingrained. Okay, you can sit there all day long and say I don't want to kill myself, but your subconscious is still repeating this over and over. Okay, or at least in my situation. So the first thing to reprogramming your brain is to get rid of this pathway. Until you get rid of this pathway, you can have all the good pathways you want. This one is still going to be used by your subconscious, even if your conscious stops using it, okay? Now, positive reinforcement, everyone should know. They usually make fun of it on like Saturday Night Live or NSL or whatever. The guy, he's standing in front of a mirror and he's chanting to himself, I am a good person. I am beautiful. I am this. I am that. I'm a great, strong man, or I'm a beautiful, gorgeous woman, whatever. Uh, and, I want you to think of it this way, okay? If you're a depressed person or you got bad thoughts all the time, here's your bad synapses, your roadway. Think of it like a muscle, you know what I mean? You've used that muscle all the time. A quarterback in the NFL that throws that long pass, it's nice and spiraled, it looks perfect, goes right into the guy's hands. Do you think he thinks about it? No, he looks, he sees where the guy is, and it's just automatic. His brain, his pathway is already the biggest muscle there is on that particular thing that he's doing because he does it all the time. Okay? It's the same here. You've built this pathway up. Look how good that is. I'd rather run through that if I was a synapse, if I was an electrical impulse, an electric, you know, what would you rather go through a wire that was this thick or a wire that was a little teeny tiny wire? You're going to go through this big, path of least resistance. You know what I mean? You're going to go through the big one. So you can sit there in the morning, like a psychologist might say, get up and say, look at yourself in the mirror, say 10 good things about yourself. You might do that, but your pathway you're forming, it's not a muscle. It has no exercise. It's just laying there like nothing. While you're doing that, your subconscious is putting a million, instead of 10, a million of those bad thoughts through there. For me, kill yourself. You know what I mean? So this is almost futile, useless. Until you get rid of this, then you can start doing this and make it as big as that. You know what I mean? But until then, it's kind of futile to do this. I want you to remember, this is the most important. This is beyond anything. There's no other thing that you can do other than this. This is the biggest. I don't care what anyone says. Cleaning your house, getting up out of bed, doing whatever, blah, blah, blah. This is the number one thing that has to be done. Without this, you're not doing what all you can do. This is it. This is like comparing a rocket to a kid on a skateboard. And this is not, don't think that you're going to reprogram your brain and, 1 year later or 1 month later, you're going to be all cured. Let me tell you, it took me 10 years of stopping this pathway, okay? And in the last 10 years, I've had too many girlfriends, probably more than I've had in my whole lifetime. And each time, they just bring me down. And before I break up with them or they break up with me, this pathway is reopened and I'm chanting again to myself, I want to die. I want to die. I wish I was dead. You know what I mean? That's why a lot of psychologists and even in AA or NA, they'll tell you, you shouldn't have a girlfriend or a boyfriend until you fix your problem. And that's the reason why, because you can't even handle your own self. Then you bring a second person on. Now you got to deal with your own problems and they have to deal with your problems also, but they will also bring you down. It is really hard to fix yourself, reprogram yourself when you're with somebody. The way you stop this bad pathway, the way I did it, okay, is because I'm a chanter. Okay, I chant. I have OCD, and I have a lot of repetitive things in my life that I don't like. One of them was the chanting in my head, over and over. I wish I was dead. So what I did was basically I just stopped it. And you could say, well, I'll just stop it. Every time I started to talk to myself or say, have that thought in my mind, I stopped myself. I said, why are you doing that? You want to stop this. Just stop it. And don't get me wrong, 1 minute later, 30 seconds later, I'd be thinking it again. You know what I mean? I'd be like, oh, I wish I was dead. I wish I was dead. But after a couple times of saying it, I'd be like, wait a second. You just said a minute ago you're going to stop this. You know what I mean? So just stop it. You don't need to think that way. You know what I mean? You don't need to chant it over and over. Stop it. And a minute later, I'd start it again. But 10 seconds after that, I'd stop myself. I'd say, you can't do that. You can't do that if you're going to reprogram your brain. You don't need this pathway. You need the synapses to form a pathway to this. And the way you do that is stop this. Then eventually, you can go on to the next step. Once you stop chanting, if you're a chanter or you're a person who just constantly says they want to die, you need to stop that before anything else. Because you cannot reprogram good stuff in there until you get this pathway and you break it and you stop it forever. Okay? Like I said, don't get me wrong. Usually I get a girlfriend, and by the end of the relationship, I'm back to having this pathway opened up. But you just have to go back. This is a life, especially if you're like a clinically depressed person. Like I've lived in a box half my life and the nut house the other half. You know what I mean? If you're really clinically, you need to stop this. Okay, you cannot move forward, and it's a lifelong commitment. Because you always backslide. You know what I mean? You just got to keep going and keep going. So I'm definitely no raving success. You know what I mean? I'm not living in a mansion. I'm still poor. But this was my life. Before, first 10 years I was on welfare. But this is my deal here. 6 months I'd work 2 jobs. I work like 80 hours a week, 110 hours a week. You know what I mean? And then after 6 months, I would go crazy. Okay. I'd end up in a nut house. I would, after the nut house, I'd either live with other people here and there, live in a box, forest, in the woods, in my car if I had one, which most of the time I didn't. And then I would go back to, I'd get all manic and I would go get 2 jobs and I'd, some 3 jobs, 80 hours was nothing. I'd need at least 100, sometimes 120 hours a week, you know what I mean? And after 6 months, I go crazy. I go back into the nut house, and I just repeated this. It was a lifelong commitment. Okay. Now, after I started to reprogram my brain, I started up a seasonal business. That way, it can coincide with my cycles of depression. You know what I mean? I could at least part of the year I could lay down in bed and cry or whatever. You know what I mean? Be a depressed idiot. And before this, my record was 8 months working consecutively. Okay, and that was like, wow, man. I was trying to get a record of 10 months. But after a couple years with my business, I only had a couple, but it was enough for someone who could live on nothing to survive. You know what I mean? But after a couple years, I worked at a factory, and I stayed there for 6 years, full time with my seasonal business, and that was my new record. I went all the way from 8 months up to 6 years, and now, eventually over time, now I'm trying to start up these channels, and before when I first started reprogramming my brain, I had no heat in the winter. My heat was an electric blanket. The heat was only put on to 40 degrees or whatever to keep so the pipes didn't freeze. That was it. My heat was my electric blanket. I had no food. Bag of potatoes that had to last me a month. And that's all I had. You know what I mean? Maybe a loaf of bread once a month. That was it to eat. You know what I mean? I had nothing. And now although the last 4 years I was living with my girlfriend and she was paying for the heat, she moved out now, and I'm gonna, I'm trying to keep the heat on like a normal person. You know what I mean? I have food in the winter. You know what I mean? Not just a bag of potatoes and a loaf of bread. It's a lifelong commitment. Am I better? God, no, I'm not better. Christ, I was in that house 7 times, man. 3 of them were, court ordered. One of them was the military, and they kicked me out. So, am I totally better? No, I'll never be totally better. But I'm a lot better. You better believe it. And that's all I could tell you. And I can always say, life is what you make it. You know what I mean? So make it great.